this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
This episode of The Middle was actually broadcast last August, but we loved it so much, we're bringing it to you again.
Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, coming to you from Birmingham, Alabama, in collaboration with station WBHM, along with Tolliver and his band. And Tolliver, we're talking about religion this hour, specifically the role of Christianity in politics, and you grew up in a religious household.
I did. It's true. I'm a PK. My dad was a pastor of a bunch of churches. He was actually a pastor of 3 churches. He was kicked out of the first 2, and I won't tell you why. But yeah, so I was really excited about this topic, and my music does, incorporate religion a lot. So.
Right. Absolutely. And we're going to hear one of those songs later. Full disclosure, I did not grow up in a religious household. My parents are of 2 different religions, didn't grow up very religious. And while the Constitution is pretty clear about the separation of church and state, it is undeniable that the Christian religion and identity play a large role in our political system, whether that's taking the oath of office on a Bible or the increasingly intertwined rhetoric that some politicians use to equate political identity with religious conviction. The latest data from the Pew Research Center, however, finds that only about 60% of Americans now identify as Christian, which is down significantly in the last few decades. So this hour, we're talking about the role of Christianity in our politics, and let's meet our panel. Elizabeth Neumann is a former Homeland Security official and author of the book Kingdom of Rage, The Rise of Christian Extremism and the Path Back to Peace. Elizabeth, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
And Collin Hansen is a Birmingham-based journalist as well as vice president of content and editor-in-chief of the Gospel Coalition. That's a network of churches and pastors. Collin, welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Well, let's start just by introducing you both to our audience. Collin, you are a Christian. You're the editor-in-chief of the Gospel Coalition. You host the Gospel Bound podcast. How do you see the role of Christianity in our politics?
It's been there from before the beginning. The United States, the people who came here, not everybody came here for good motives. People came here for ill motives, but a lot of the people who came to the United States from the very beginning were people who were looking to exercise their faith. And so this is not something that comes in at a different point, at a certain later point, but what you can observe is that throughout American history, religious influence has waxed and waned. it's been more, it's been less. We sometimes imagine that this is something where this was the past and now this is the present, this is where we're going in the future. The reality of religious influence is up and down. Just to give a very brief look at that of a couple examples, the American Revolutionary period was the low point of church attendance in American history. It was the most secular time in American history, followed by the Second Great Awakening, which was the peak, which led to the Civil War. And then you see a large decline of religiosity and influence on politics all the way until the Cold War. And then you see a massive increase, and the decrease that you're talking about tends to coincide with the end of the Cold War. So Christianity, historically speaking, especially Christianity, but religion in general, has had a huge influence, but not always the same way.
Do you feel like we're at a low point right now of Christianity's influence in our politics, or where are we?
Yeah, I definitely think we're at a low point. The number of people who affiliated with a church in the year 2000 was 70%. That number over the course of 20 years has declined to 47%. But here's what's significant about that number. That number of 70% was stable for almost all the 20th century. So something changed around the year 2000. What I would posit is that, number one, that was the first year that a majority of Americans had the internet in their homes. That's number one. Number two, it's some of the effects of certainly the end of the Cold War in this new future.
Interesting. Elizabeth Neumann, you're also a Christian. You were a Homeland Security official in the Trump administration. You left the administration and said that it was not taking the threat of violent extremism on the political right seriously.
That's right. I have been in the Homeland Security space since just after 9/11. I served initially in the George W. Bush administration. I served as a contractor in the Obama administration. In the national security space, national security is not a partisan thing. So serving in the Trump administration, I was concerned that, and it wasn't just me, there were a number of people in the counterterrorism community that were concerned about what we were seeing as an increase in violent extremism, not just from overseas, not just ISIS, but happening from within. And we sounded the alarm a number of times, tried to get it written into national level policy, and were largely rebuffed.
So you didn't feel you had a home in the Trump administration. What about your faith journey? Do you feel like you still have a home in your church?
You know, that's a great question. I am a practicing Christian, and I do have a home church, and I feel very welcome in that community. But certainly the Christian culture that I grew up in Dallas, Texas, so I'm a Bible Belt kid. That culture I no longer feel welcome in. And that was probably a realization that occurred over the last 10 years, but especially around 2016.
Why?
Because increasingly I felt that the Christian church was identifying with Republican Party politics, and it became one and the same. So if you were a Christian, you were expected to vote a certain way, you were expected to have a certain set of politics. And when you had a candidate like Donald Trump who didn't even pretend to try to have the virtues or the values that previous politicians at least pretended to have, I found it kind of the height of hypocrisy that a party that thought that somebody that committed adultery in the Oval Office can no longer serve as president, somehow they could get behind somebody that had been thrice married and also committed adultery and, you know, a whole host of other offenses.
Collin Hansen, without making this all about Donald Trump, let me just ask you, what do you think of that, what she's saying about Christianity and its tie to the Republican Party and feeling unwelcome because her politics are not what other members of her church's politics are?
Yeah, my background is in politics as well, and I actually worked in the Republican Party for a number of years and identified that way for a long time. I think what a lot of people are finally realizing is that there's been a massive shift in the Republican Party. Many of them evangelical Christians living in suburban areas like Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, the suburbs of Atlanta would be another example, suburbs of Dallas would be another example, have largely been pushed out of both parties, and a lot of the issues that they care about, abortion would be one of them, have been pushed out of both party platforms. But what's replaced them have been a number of people who identify more loosely with Christianity, but would be more identified as populists, and historically were Democrats. So we're going through a political shift that is reshaping both parties, and so a number of people who had identified their Christianity with their politics in a former Republican Party really don't have a home there anymore, and they certainly don't have a home, for the most part, in the Democratic Party either.
I want to at this point in the conversation, just ask you, I'm sure there are many people who are listening to this right now who are not religious at all and would say the Constitution is clear, separation of church and state. Why are we even having this discussion? Elizabeth Neumann, what do you say to people who would say that?
Well, I certainly am very thankful that we have a Constitution that allows the free exercise of religion, and I don't interpret separation of church and state to mean that you can't have a conversation in the public square about religion. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about our country is to have people with different perspectives, different beliefs, and being able to exchange ideas. I also believe that just historically, as Collin mentioned, a lot of our countries, some of the freedoms that got baked into our Constitution actually have their historic roots in Christian principles and Christian a foundational idea of the Imago Dei, the idea that all men are created equal. You can tie directly back to this vision of being made in the image of God, and that because we're made in the image of God, we're all able to have the same value, equality, dignity, worth. And so those concepts that really, if you trace the history of Christendom, there's a lot of damage that Christianity has done in the last 2 millennia. So I'm not going to sit here and say like it's all roses, but there were a lot of beautiful blessings that came to bear in Western civilization and eventually in the United States. So it's worth not losing those beautiful things that offered this idea of human equality and human dignity.
How do you not lose those beautiful things, as you say, while recognizing that people can have any kind of religion in this country and it doesn't have to be based on the principles of one faith?
I think that there's a lot of fear that the country is changing. And I think there are a lot of people that come from a Christian background, maybe not actually are Christians. In fact, we have a lot of data to show that there are a lot of people that don't consider themselves to be saved, believe Jesus is their savior, but they come from Christian culture. They like that culture. They want to hold on to that culture, and they're scared because the country has changed rather drastically in a short period of time. And human beings in general don't like change. Mm-hmm. They don't like uncertainty. And in that rapid change, they're seeking to hold on to something. And part of what we're seeing in our current politics is various efforts to try to go back to some golden vision of what the way it used to be. And of course, the Christian culture gets wrapped into that. And I as a believer, I think that's not actually an accurate representation of what Christianity is, but that has gotten wrapped into our politics right now. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, is to try to start separating our politics from our faith. Those do need to be separate in how we view the world.
Collin Hansen, is there a mixing of politics and religion right now in the sense that certain figures, and let's say Donald Trump, are seen as religious figures by some? If you were watching the Republican National Convention, people were talking about how Trump was saved by God during that assassination attempt, even saved by God so that he could be the president of the United States.
I mean, you always see that in our politics, and I think it's noteworthy that President Biden had also said, I'm not getting out of this race unless God tells me.
Right, the Almighty.
Unless, the Almighty tells me that I should do that. And so it's pretty much a staple of American politics. And I think if a politician did not do that, it would be conspicuous. But the fact that they do it, it just is part of the noise. And there are those moments where politicians will try to use religion, and it's typically Christianity, as a prop to be able to push for a certain kind of loyalty and that kind of demand. But generally speaking, you see it cut both ways in our politics. Maybe it's sometimes just more invisible to the side that we prefer.
Stand by, because in a moment we're going to talk about just the things you're mentioning there and the rise of what's called Christian nationalism. And we're going to hear from members of our live audience. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to The Middle.
Finally free. I got no wings. Oh, pass it, baby. 'Cause everyone can see through me. 'Cause heaven's at my fingers. Hear the angels singing. Gabriel is laughing. Blow, baby.
Olympics. You'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Cold Water Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, we're usually a national call-in show focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we are not taking calls because we're listening back to a show from last year that we did in front of a live audience in Birmingham, Alabama, asking about the role of Christianity in our politics. My guests were former Homeland Security official Elizabeth Neumann, whose book is called Kingdom of Rage, The Rise of Christian Extremism and the Path Back to Peace, and Collin Hansen, who's Vice President of Content and Editor-in-Chief of the Gospel Coalition. As we continued our conversation, I asked Elizabeth Neumann how Christianity and politics in the United States became so intertwined. In her book, she writes, what started 50 plus years ago as an alliance between white evangelical Christians and the Republican Party for political power has solidified as the core identity for a strong majority of the white evangelical Christian community.
So because I am a Christian, made a decision when I was looking at why do we have such an epidemic of violence in this country. As I mentioned earlier, starting in around 2015, all of the metrics start going up. And if you look at who is perpetrating those attacks, some of them are non-ideological. You can't put them on the right-left spectrum. But of those that are ideologically motivated, they fall on the right side of the spectrum. And that really concerned me. There's a lot of academic reasons why that might be, but there's also in those movements this undercurrent of Christianity. Now, and if you were to just stop any random person that goes to church on Sunday and ask them if they agree with militia violent extremism or white supremacist extremism, they would say, of course not, that's horrible. Violence is not tolerated in our religion. But somehow those movements were gaining momentum, and we also were starting to have increases in political violence, things that aren't necessarily associated with an organized violent extremist movement. And so I was very perplexed by the fact that this was coming from my community, like literally geographically my community, my faith community, my political community.
How tied, though, is the radicalization of people to religion?
So that's part of the reason I spent the last 3 years trying to understand this. I don't think it's a particular religion in a traditional sense. Like, take the politics out of it. Like, you go to church on a Sunday or you practice any faith, you're not going to walk out of there more likely to be willing to commit an act of violence. The problem is when there are political motives that, combined with social media, are driving us to live in a persistent state of fear and outrage. And we are told over and over again that we're living in this existential threat of a moment, that your way of life, your success or survival is being threatened by some other. The other could be defined depending on what community you find yourself in. So for a Christian community, the other, generally speaking, and I'm talking white evangelical Christian community, the other is liberals, it's coastal elites, it's people who don't practice our faith. The other is anybody that's different than us, and they're trying to take away our way of life. And I could probably ask Collin, I'm sure he's had similar experiences. I've sat through sermons where pastors have told us that in our lifetime, pastors will be jailed for teaching a biblically orthodox scripture. And so that fear for 10-ish years has led us to a place where there's some small percentage of that community who has gotten to a place where they are cognitively open to violence as a solution, which is my definition of extremism. And it's because we've been saturated in this fear and grievance cycle for at least a decade, really going back several decades because of the merger with politics.
Collin Hansen.
Well, I think what's so interesting about having this conversation in the middle is where we're having the conversation in Birmingham, Alabama. This is a city that is more familiar with forms of violence than maybe any other city in America, and certainly in very famous ways in American history. And in part, extremism that's been wielded against Christians. Of course, that's the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963, was an act of violence against an actual church and actual Christians who were exercising their faith. And so extremism is certainly an American problem. It's not a new thing. It's not partisan. It's not one specific group, but it can be wielded. Religion can be wielded by people for any kinds of different motivations. What's so fascinating is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. described himself as an extremist. He said, I'm an extremist for love. So the question I think that Elizabeth helps us to drive toward is not necessarily about whether you're an extremist per se, but what you're an extremist for. You can be an extremist for love and do what Dr. King did here in the streets of Birmingham, or you can be an extremist for hate and do what the Klan members did to those little girls in that church. So it's not so much about extremism per se, but about what it's wielded for.
You say we're here in Birmingham, Alabama. Alabama is also, I believe, the state with the highest percentage of people who identify as Christian out of any state in the entire country, or at least up there among the top one or two or three. Yeah. And also, as you mentioned, there was a history in the civil rights movement of tying the movement and many parts of it to the Christian faith. Elizabeth Neumann, is there a difference between that and some of the Christian nationalism that we see now?
Yes, Christian nationalism is arguably more nationalism than it is Christian. Nationalism is a political philosophy, and in my world, where we counter violent extremism, it can be a form of extremism if you are willing to take action, hostile action against the people that don't fit your nationalist description. So in nationalism, there's an identity that of the people that make up the nation, and if you're part of that group, you're the in group. If you do not fit that definition of what it means to be a part of your nationalistic identity, then you're a part of the outgroup. And what we see in nationalistic cultures, it tends to creep towards giving preference to those that are on the inside. Sometimes it creeps towards actually providing penalties to those that are outside. Sometimes it's criminal penalties, sometimes it's violence. And look, there are certain smaller variations of nationalism. You look at the United Kingdom, they have a Church of England, they have a state religion, but you don't pay more taxes if you don't go to the Church of England. You're still allowed to vote, you're still allowed to participate as a citizen, even if you don't belong to the Church of England. But there are some in the United States who are arguing that we should redefine our country based on what they perceive to be a historical tie to Christianity and actually give favor or preference to those who are practicing Christians, that our laws should be favorable and lean into that Christian heritage.
Why this in-group, out-group, us versus them isn't a huge part of the Christian faith, love thy neighbor? Why? I mean, This show is called The Middle. I mean, we're talking across party lines from different parts of the country. Collin, Hansen, what about love thy neighbor?
Yeah, again, it's going back to what I was saying earlier about it. What does that love look like? So for King, what he was all about was saying that my opposing white segregationists is actually my love for them. But what's interesting about the Christian faith is that we believe that you don't even necessarily know always yourself what's best for you. And so you can extrapolate that to your neighbor as well and say that sometimes loving your neighbor is not necessarily doing what they would perceive to be love. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to think about this way. You might just be a parent and think this way. It's a basic aspect of parenting, that you do not always give people what they want, in part because you say, I love you too much to be able to do that. So in some ways, our laws, insofar as they're based on love, are acts of restraining people against things that would be harmful to them, whether they want to do that or not. Again, there's a whole range here. We all ascribe to that in certain ways, and we also recognize other ways where we think that's too far. But that's part of what Elizabeth is trying to get at here, is that there's a lot of debate about how far that ought to go. And I think it's actually the rise of secularism that's bringing this all about, kind of to renegotiate, because as you say, with the church not being the dominant social force that it had been in the past, bringing people together with a lot of assumptions that they had shared, there's this sense of, well, maybe it's all up for grabs now. We need to renegotiate this communal agreement to the point where some people are saying, the Constitution's a dead letter. We need to throw that out. We need to start from scratch. It's the kind of extremism I don't support, and they would say that they are loving their neighbors and doing that. I don't agree with that, but that's how you get there.
Let's get to some audience questions. Let's hear from you.
My name is Kel, and in listening to what you had said earlier about the faith was down in numbers and attendance and such, I think one of the reasons is the lack of trust in the faith, trust in Christianity. How can we address that?
That's a wonderful question. I appreciate that. The lack of trust in religion is actually part of a much broader decline in trust of all institutions in American life. About the only institution that doesn't see a massive decline is the military. But that's why you see it celebrated in certain environments. That's still kind of the institution everybody can rally around in there. One of the challenges for any institutions in this era is transparency. People can see things that they couldn't see before, in largely because of the internet, and that's led to this widespread erosion. The only thing you can do about that, whether you're the church or you're a local social club or anything, is to live with transparency and integrity, and to have leaders who are willing to live according to a creed that considers others more important than themselves. Christianity should have resources to be able to do that in the example of Jesus Christ himself, but nevertheless it proves very difficult in a world where, as Christians, we understand is full of sin, and we're just as tempted as everybody else. But I would love to see the church as setting the example for other institutions to follow. Perhaps we'll get there.
Thank you for that question. Let's get to another one.
My name is John. I grew up in Birmingham, and so this is for either of the panelists. So I'd like you to explain like the mindset of how why Christians, religious people in general, but Christians especially, like to publicly insert their faith into politics and government. And that is why the Freedom from Religion Foundation has so much work, and atheists and secular people like me get so upset because we feel like our rights are being trampled on. So there's that one Bible verse about not being like the Pharisees, going to pray in the closet instead of out in the public. Why don't more Christians follow that practice?
I mean, it's a really great question, right? Like that our private faith should be more real than our public faith, I think. And I do think that's gotten inverted, mainly because I think there's two answers to your question. You said, why is it that politics has faith so prominent? And I would say it's because it works. It gets you votes. There's a segment of our society that sees the spiritual as very powerful, and so if they see a politician using it, they identify like, oh, they're like one of me, even though I would say, like, especially in an era of transparency, I find it odd that somebody's personal actions don't attest more than what they say on a dais somewhere. Like there's just this disconnect between behavior that would, in Christian parlance, the fruit or the lack thereof. But somehow, if they say the right thing on a campaign slogan or on a stage somewhere, where that counts more than their actual actions.
I wonder if you think we're seeing that, by the way, right now in the fact that a number of pretty conservative Republican states have been voting overwhelmingly in favor of abortion rights, even though the politicians that they tend to elect would be publicly against that.
Yeah, I don't really, I will tell you, like I've struggled with, I grew up in the 90s, and I thought that when the leaders were telling us like, no, it's really important, personal character matters. That's what I grew up with. Personal character in our leaders matter. And that's why if you're growing up in the Bible Belt as a Republican, well, you can't vote for Clinton. Like that's what I was taught. And then somehow 20 years later, that's not the same. Like, and so you start to go, oh, we don't actually believe this. This really is about power. This isn't about character at all. And to be clear, I don't think that's true for everybody, but certainly there were a whole lot of leaders and a whole lot of Christian leaders, like pastors, who kind of just chucked aside the character thing and said, it's this election's too important. We can't stand up for our values because we got to defeat the other guys. And I think that there's just a lot of entanglement with power, and it became very hypocritical. But I hear what you were saying, sir, and I think it's a real detriment and a ceiling on Christianity itself that we're not creating a space where you feel loved and affirmed and welcomed to the public square, because that's what our faith teaches us we should be doing, that we should be welcoming to all, regardless of what you believe, because you, in my belief, are made in the image of God. So it's a shame that you don't feel that from the Christian community.
These audience questions are fantastic, so let's get another one.
Yeah, my name is Emma Noble, and I'm from Birmingham, and I've lived here my whole life. As we know, the separation of church and state was paraphrased from a letter of Thomas Jefferson's. Do you feel like this idea is sufficiently reflected in the Constitution? And if not, what would codifying that look like?
Great question.
That's a good question. Yeah, in response, of course, to Baptists, to the Danbury Baptists in that particular case. I think it's a fair summary in a lot of ways of what the Free Exercise Clause means, and the idea of keeping government interference out of religion and that concept. But again, where it's often gone astray is the notion of separation of religion from public life. That clearly was not a concept that anybody would have had back then, despite the fact that Jefferson himself, of course, was very famously not a practicing Christian. Same way John Adams, even George Washington were, again, shockingly secular figures for that time. But I think one thing I just want to point out as a Baptist and as a Christian is that the separation of church and state has been one of the best things for the church. Elizabeth pointed out, the Church of England, in meshing official church theology with politics does not go well, but mainly it goes badly for the church. And so part of my concern as a Christian and as a Baptist is to preserve that so that the government and religion might do each what they do best, and that I think as Christians we are at our best when we're putting our faith into action by loving our neighbors, which includes political engagement in a lot of different ways. So I don't know what it would look like to codify that more so. It would be interesting legislatively to think about that, but certainly the Supreme Court usually is what fills the gap these days.
It's true.
I can't let us mention Thomas Jefferson without stating my favorite Thomas Jefferson fact, which is that in the 1960s, the early 1960s, because Thomas Jefferson, for all of his faults that have been talked about, was also like one of the most brilliant people ever to occupy the White House. And John F. Kennedy had all of the Nobel Prize winners over to the White House in the early 1960s. And he said, never before in the history of this room has there been such a collection of intellect, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone.
That's quite true. That's quite true.
Learn that in Monticello. We'll stand by, because in a moment we're going to talk about new moves by some politicians to increase the level of Christianity in all of our lives. You're listening to The Middle, coming to you from Birmingham, Alabama, in association with WBHM.
We should take some more questions, man. It's getting spicy in here. This one is called Sweet Tooth, dedicated to all the good food we've had since we got here. Y'all ain't finna make me slam my head against the wall. Got me feeling crazy, cause everybody know I'm on. Yeah, I'll bring the heat too. Come on, tell me when you got a sweet tooth. Bad times got me feeling evil, but I'll punch a wall till it's true. Baby, I know that I got it.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy, with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years right where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. We're listening back this hour to a conversation we had in front of a live audience in Birmingham, Alabama last year about the role of Christianity in our politics. My guests were Collin Hansen, Vice President of Content and Editor-in-Chief of the Gospel Coalition, and former Homeland Security official Elizabeth Neumann, whose book is called Kingdom of Rage. Just before the show was recorded, the Alabama State Supreme Court made national news when it outlawed in vitro fertilization treatment, or IVF. The Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court wrote, "Human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God." So I asked Collin Hansen, is that appropriate, coming from a judge who is supposed to respect the separation of church and state?
It's a good question. I think you can see it a couple different ways. To pretend like our law is secular without reference to the divine, even if it doesn't mention the divine, is to fool ourselves, historically speaking, in there. At the same time, we do have a constitution that is a shockingly secular document for its period of time that does not use those explicit Christian appeals in those kinds of cases. So not only is it a rather unusual move, but probably not one that is warranted precisely on the terms of the Constitution. But in some ways, the Supreme Court was simply saying the quiet part out loud that, yes, our laws have their origins in many cases in different forms of divine revelation.
But Elizabeth Neumann, and you write about this in your book, how does that play out when you have an issue like same-sex marriage or like gender identity, which is obviously in the news a lot right now, where maybe you have a judge who feels that way, but you also have a First Amendment issue or the person's ability to live their life and be free?
I mean, this is where we need the legislature to be doing its job. If you take relatively new issues, right, like transgender challenges, how do we help kids who are struggling with their gender identity? You know, that's a tough question, and we're just getting evidence in to know the right way to help kids. And we should be having dialogue about that. And right now we're just yelling at each other with talking points. And I don't know that that's actually helping the kids. So there's two pieces here. One, all of us as citizens should be learning how to have dialogue around kind of tough conversations, but not in fear, but out of love for, I think, most people. Most people are like, how do we help our kids, right? Like, most of us just want our kids to do well, and we want to find the right path forward on an issue like this. So one, we as citizens need to do a better job in how we dialogue about it, not give in to those political talking points. But two, we need our legislatures to do their job. It's not the job of a court to figure this out. The court's just supposed to interpret the law as it was written by a legislature, and if the legislature isn't addressing these issues, we need to vote those goes out and get somebody in who will do the job.
Let's go to the audience. Sir, you have a question or a comment.
My name is Richard, another non-believer here. To me, the most important part of the Bible is two phrases: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and love thy neighbor as thyself. Do you think it would help if the Democrats turned the tables on the Republicans and said, okay, if you're going to bring religion into this, let's go full Jesus. Immigrants are our neighbors. Let's love them and help them. Those who are in need of health care, Jesus would say, let's give them universal health care. And by the way, would Jesus want you to carry an assault rifle with a 30-round magazine?
It's a good question. I would simply point out that there's a reason that President Biden was preaching in a church almost every single week, because religion is central to the Democratic Party's arguments, and could introduce you to the religious left and figures like Jim Wallace, who have been around for many decades arguing that exact thing, and certainly had a huge influence in the Obama administration as an example. So I think this is a theme that I keep coming back to a little bit here, which is that we act as though Christianity or religion
only on one side.
is on one side,
Right.
but I don't think anything in American politics, historically or present, makes any sense without understanding the massive influence on all of our politics, of Christianity in particular. And again, I just want to point out, of all places, Birmingham, Alabama, which is one of the most, if not the most religious areas in the country, is precisely that way because of its Democratic voters who are African Americans who bring their faith to every aspect of their life every day, including their politics. So I think we're seeing a lot of that already.
Let's go to another question from the audience.
Good evening. My name is John. I've been here for the last 10 years. I'm from Maryland, born and raised. I guess my question and statement is around human inefficiency. How do we continue to show up in moments and be outside of what we want for ourselves, right? On a macro scale, for thousands of years, and we still haven't been able to reframe this problem and adjust how we even exist in a moment so we be more closer to kindness, love, integrity, respect, peace, tacos, I don't know.
I mean, I love tacos. I'm from Texas.
Breakfast tacos.
Breakfast tacos. I had a pork carnita last night. So in the book, I spend the first half of the book explaining what extremism is, how people radicalize, why people radicalize, what's really going on. And I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. We've been studying this problem for 2 decades, and the primary drivers are not ideological, they are psychosocial. It's an unmet need for belonging and an unmet need for significance. And in the second part of the book, I offer suggestions, primarily for the community I came from, the Christian community, the conservative community, on here's what we can do to build protective factors so that we're less vulnerable to those voices that can pull us into an extremist mindset. But those factors kind of come down to loving your neighbor, getting outside of yourself. You know, how do you solve the problem of belonging? You go out and you get engaged. How do you solve the problem of significance? You find belonging. Because our significance is not, contrary to what our culture teaches us, it is not the degree that you get, it's not the profession or the awards that you can put on your bookshelf. Your significance is going to be in the other people that you invest in. At least that's what I believe. And I think if we would spend more time carving it, like doing the hard work of making sure that you have time and space in your calendar to be investing in those relationships that really matter, whether it's your family or whether it's your neighbors or your community. I would suggest it needs to be more than your family, but sometimes we're in seasons of life that's all we can do. But get out there and investing in your community. That's where we're going to find our significance. And in doing that, in serving one another, we find our belonging too.
You mean we don't find our belonging and significance in doom scrolling on social media? That's not...
I've tried it for a while. It did not work.
Tolliver, that's what you thought.
I was like, don't come for me, Jeremy.
Let's get to another member of the audience here.
My name's Katie. I'm from Birmingham. The question I have is this. What would your response be to the shift from religious rhetoric in politics to religious products and propaganda in politics?
Oh, man. Yeah, actually, your question prompted something else in my mind, because after the attempted assassination, I do a lot of conversations with members of the press, helping them understand things about extremists and radicalization and mass shooters, that kind of stuff. And one of the phenomenon that we're seeing in individuals that are committing these attacks is that they're not like the extremists from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, ideology was really intense and deeply rooted, and people would have read texts, and there's like usually somebody who's in charge of saying like, this is the ideology that we belong to. Think bin Laden, right? Like bin Laden.
Or like the Charleston 9
Yes.
shooter, be another example of that.
Yeah, and so there used to be like a deeply held tie to the ideology that was motivating them or encouraging them, giving them that moral permission structure to go commit the act of violence. That's not the situation these days. In most cases, the ideology is like memeified, meaning like they're radicalizing by just seeing funny pictures with like a little word here or there. It's not text-based, it's image-based, it's very vibe. It's about the vibe, which is wild. But it also is indicative of the individuals that are moving towards this. It's not a rational thing. It's not a mindset of like, I'm going to read a bunch of text to better understand why I need to do this. It's not a logic. They're in a place of deep despair, and more we're seeing people that are very nihilistic. Like there's no way out of this, and that's why they go and do these horrific acts. And I'm drawing the connection to your question because it's a reflection of culture as a whole. We don't read as much as we used to. There's tons of data that tells us this now. Our attention spans are so much shorter, so much so that like
We don't socialize as much.
we don't socialize
Not nearly as much. Sex is way down.
Yeah, there's
also.
that too. There's that too.
It is.
And so there's just this. We're kind of increasingly moving to a place where it's just the picture. And that's all that matters, and that's what motivates us.
The Las Vegas shooting, that's still the largest mass shooting, is
Yes.
that right? We don't even know the
know.
motive.
It was never considered an act of terrorism because there's no ideological nexus that was discovered.
Let's get to another question from the audience.
My name is Jim, and what I like to understand is what do we mean by Christian extremism? I will say this. If it had not been for Christian extremism, I was in that bombing at 16th Street. You killed four of my young girls. If it had not been for Christian extremism telling me, you've heard it said, to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. If it hadn't been for Christian extremism from a black preacher that said, love your enemies, because the Word of God said it. Extremism taught me not to hate, taught me to love and to see every human being, not by the color of their skin, but what the content of their character is. What is Christian extremism that we label it as something to be fearful of, when the extremism is to learn to love one another as Christ has loved? That's extremism to me. And why do you vilify that type of extremism?
If I could ask, why do you consider that extremism?
Because what are we saying, Christian extremism? What is Christian extremism? I see more extremism on the other side than coming from religious Christians. Why are we labeling Christians as extremists? And what is that? That's the question I'm asking. What is Christian extremism?
I love the question, and I love the framing that you're bringing to it. In my professional world, extremism is associated with violence. It is not the Webster definition of extremism, which could include things that here's the mainstream and extremes are on either side. That's not my professional way of approaching extremism. Extremism in my world is when an in-group perceives a threat from an out-group to their success or survival and determines that the only action they can therefore take is hostile action. It's the hostile action that makes it extremist from a counterterrorism perspective. I'm not suggesting that there aren't plenty of other lenses to view the term extremism, but the reason I wrote the book was to address the hostile action that has become kind of second nature for a large swath of the Christian culture that I came from. Hostile action is a spectrum. There's a lower end of the spectrum that is not criminal. It includes bullying, harassment, threats, and intimidation. Now, you can do a lot of things in civil court with those things, but it is actually really hard to criminally charge that lower end of the spectrum. Then it moves into criminal activity like hate crime, property destruction. Then you get to terrorism and genocide. That's the hostile action spectrum. What we know about people that go on to commit violent extremism, so the violent side of that spectrum, is that they start off on the lower end of the spectrum. The way that we understand people's pathway is that you always are going to have a much larger, think of it like a funnel, a much larger number at the top who are willing to cognitively be open to the possibility that violence is an option. People that are willing to engage in that harassing behavior. Maybe it's just online. Maybe you would never do it in person. But it's still harassing or threatening or intimidating. It still meets that definition. As you move down the funnel, smaller and smaller percentage will actually ever mobilize to violence. Very small percentage actually move into that criminal space.
Let's get one more question in.
Hello, I'm Rosemary Bogan. I've lived here in Alabama for 28 years, but I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so I won't sound like I'm from here. My question is, how close do you think we are to a theocracy, where people believe that leaders are supremely appointed and supremely led by a divine power that they think is the divine power, the right one?
Great question, Collin Hansen.
So I have likewise observed a surprising number of people who are advocating what Elizabeth is talking about, especially a theocratic government that would impose actual theological tests for criminality. I didn't see that nearly as much 20 years ago as I see it now, but I think it's precisely because the possibility is ever more absurd that it would actually happen. So it's an inverse relationship. The more you hear people talk about it, the less likely it actually is to happen. So it's actually related. You hear more talk about theocracy because of secularism. So like I said, everything's just kind of jumbled up and people are grasping for some sort of stable order. And to put it another way, very briefly, there were two forces that brought America together. One was historic Protestant, especially Christianity. The second was what the scholar James Davison Hunter at the University of Virginia describes as the hybrid Enlightenment. That's more what you think of with Jefferson and others. The difficulty in our situation right now is, as we've been talking about all night, Christianity is at a low ebb of influence, and religion in general, even with a lot of immigration influx, a lot of secularism. But it combines then with the decline and eclipse of the Enlightenment as well. People don't trust Enlightenment liberalism the way that they used to. There's not a sense of objective standards outside the self that our founders would have had. And so broadly speaking in a culture, there's a question of, can this system of government actually work anymore? Yeah. So that's why you see some people saying, well, what we really need to do is go back to a Christian kind of theocracy. But again, I think it's largely because it's simply utterly implausible that you hear more people talk about it.
Our conversation from last summer in front of a live audience in Birmingham, Alabama, in partnership with WBHM. That was Collin Hansen, Vice President of Content and Editor-in-Chief of the Gospel Coalition, and former Homeland Security official Elizabeth Neumann, whose book is called Kingdom of Rage, The Rise of Christian Extremism and the Path Back to Peace. Next week, we'll be right back here live, and our One Thing Trump Did podcast will drop in a few days on the Middle podcast feed. As always, you can reach out to us at listentothemiddle.com, where you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter. And of course, buy Middle merch like t-shirts and hats and mugs. The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmis-Dawes, John Barth, Annika Deschler, and Brandon Kondritz. Our technical director is Jason Croft. Thanks to our satellite radio listeners, our podcast audience, and the now more than 430 public radio stations that are making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'll talk to you next week.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
14 years in prison for killing a young woman. A 15-year sentence for a crash that caused 3 deaths. 12 and a half years for killing a child and critically injuring her mother. All true stories, all caused by marijuana-impaired drivers. No matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So, if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.